He's Brady Quinn, Fox Sports College and NFL studio and game analyst, and he has a radio show on Fox Sports Radio called Two Pros and a Cup of Joe, and it precedes this program with LeVar Arrington and Jonas Knox. You can catch him weekdays 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern, and that leads right into our show. Brady joins us on the program. Brady, good morning. What do you take away from last night's Browns win?
I think two things. One, the Browns have a roster and a football team that is resilient, and I think can withstand some injuries and still find a way of winning football games, especially when you see the way Case Keenum played, Johnson at the running back spot. But that was something that, looking into this year, coming into it, I kind of felt like the Browns could withstand some of those injuries, some of what happens during the course of an NFL season. And for the Broncos, I think a couple things offensively stood out. You know, they just got to find a way of being able to produce more points. I know the Browns have a good defense, especially that front, but the offensive line has gotten exposed for the Broncos the past couple of weeks now. And there's no big plays within that offense, but they've got the ability to make those plays on the outside. I don't know if they need to take more chances or what you want to attribute it to, maybe the play of Teddy Bridgewater. But there's some disconnect right now on offense for the Broncos, because that's a better football team than I think their record shows right now.
And I know everybody's banged up. The Browns are banged up. The offensive line, you got your running backs, you got your wide receivers, you got Baker Mayfield there. And we add a 17th game. I mean, it's a war of attrition here, Brady. I'm amazed at the players. I know money, kind of trumps everything, but it's like, yeah, bring in another game here. It's hard enough to get through 16. Now you're adding one more, and we're at week 7, and you have all of these injuries. Is this just an aberration, or do you think this is what, we got to get geared up for?
No, I think it's what we have to get geared up for. And the disappointing thing is that the players didn't push back and say we need an expanded roster. We need to have an even greater roster, in particular on game day. We need to have an extra bye week. Like, all these things that I think are important to taking care of players' bodies. None of that got accomplished when you signed on to a CBA that was going to, potentially increase to 17 games. And look, eventually we'll get to 18 games. I mean, that's where this is going. It's all about money. We know that's the prerogative of the NFL owners. At some point, if the NFLPA is really being honest with themselves, they need to start taking how many games these players can actually take seriously, and realize that it is a brutal physical sport, and you have to do something to counteract the toll that's taken on these players' bodies, whether it's, again, additional bye, expanding the roster. So you've got, the ability to have more guys on there, more guys practicing throughout the course of the week too, just additional bodies to help with that, give guys rest. I mean, there's a myriad of ways I think you can circumvent some of that, but it doesn't seem like the NFLPA understands those leverage points to kind of flex against the owners in those negotiations.
Baker Mayfield wants to come back, but he's got, it's his non-throwing shoulder, but that's part of your DNA as the quarterback. Like, you have to get back there, but is that a good thing for the Browns? Is that a good thing for Baker, that he's trying to, come back maybe sooner than he needs to?
Well, he is kind of, I don't want to say in a contract year, but I think he'd like to get that next contract. So clearly there's some incentive to come back there. I think anytime you're a quarterback and you're on the sideline and you're watching a guy go in there and be able to operate the way Case Keenum did last night, I don't know how much longer you want that to go on. You don't want that thought to creep in back of anyone else's mind where you say, well, what if this guy puts together a string of 3 or 4 really good games? I'm not saying Case Keenum's going to be the guy, but let's just say after the season, there's a chance maybe Russell Wilson's available. We're still hearing trade rumors for Deshaun Watson. I don't know if any of that's going to come through or not now. If it doesn't, maybe after the season he becomes available, depending on how the legal situation squares itself out. Aaron Rodgers, there's speculation this might be his last year in Green Bay. There's a number of quarterbacks who I think would look at that roster in Cleveland and go, yeah, sign me up for that. So I think you got to be careful. If you can come back and play and it's not going to diminish your ability to go in and play effectively, yeah, you probably need to be back in there and be a part of your team and try to make that playoff run.
But why can't the Browns go? Now, I don't want to give Baker a long-term contract. And I'd still like to see what happens the rest of the year before I do that. But even then, I can't give him $40 million. What if I just said 5 years, $150? Because
how much of that is guaranteed?
Let's make 3/4 of it guaranteed. How's that?
Okay. I'm trying to do the quick math in my head here. It's kind of early in the morning out here on the West Coast, Dan. So I'm trying to put this all together. No, I think it all depends on the structure of that contract, what it looks like, and then what he feels comfortable with at this point.
Yeah, but what's
Right.
his
I mean,
marketplace though, Brady? If like what's he going to do? Hey, we're going to give you this. Who's going to give him top end money?
well, I think a quarterback needy team, if he was able to hit free agency. I mean, that's the reality of it. So, what that contract's going to look like. We talked about this before. His fifth-year option next year, and then 2 additional years of the franchise tag. That should be the base, really the floor of those negotiations of what he would sign an extension for, and at least what the first 3 years would look like.
Yeah.
So, calculating some of those numbers into it, if they offered him anything less than that, I'd say no, because I'd be willing to go through the risk at least. And that's just me. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he wants the financial security of having that lump of sum of money right now.
Sure.
But they've already picked up his fifth-year option, and if they pick up the subsequent, franchise tags for years 1 and 2 in that, each year's guaranteed. So it all depends on what he's willing to do, how long he's willing to push this, and what he thinks he's worth in his mind. You and I might have an idea of what he thinks he's worth, but I can promise you this: every single quarterback in the NFL thinks they're the best, and they think they should be paid the most. That's just how we're wired. That's how we think. It might be crazy to everyone else out there, but that's what we think in our minds. Case Keenum probably even thinks that. He's probably thinking, like, give me another game. Let me show you what I'm all about.
And I don't know if it's a big drop off with Case Keenum. I mean, he knows Kevin Stefanski from Minnesota. He's played in a couple of big playoff games. It's just the difference is star power here, in my opinion.
It's star power. I think there's some other intangibles too. I think Baker has a stronger arm. I think Baker's best football is his ceiling's higher than probably what Case's is. But to your point, I don't know that the floor is really that much different from those two. And I think Case is very serviceable. I mean, we've seen him be able to make a playoff run in the past. So especially with the good teams surrounded around him, which they've got right now in Cleveland. So that's a fair assessment. But ultimately it comes down to the Browns have to make a decision on, do they feel like Baker Mayfield is good enough to be able to win them a Super Bowl? And if they're comfortable with being able to check that box and say that's the case, then the contract's the contract. Because the reality is of these contracts, you're going to end up redoing it, especially if it's a 5-year deal, 3 years into it, probably, if things are going how you want them to go, right? If you have the same head coach, the same general manager, and you're winning football games, you're already going to have to renegotiate that contract, either to create cap space for another player or because you don't want him to get any closer to free agency. And the more economical way of doing that is to be able to, negotiate or renegotiate that extension earlier in that contract, rather as opposed to waiting until he gets closer to free agency. So that's all if everything goes well. If it doesn't go well, yeah, you got a new head coach, new general manager. He might be playing out that contract or maybe being traded on that contract. There's all those what ifs.
He's Brady Quinn, Fox Sports College and NFL studio and game analyst. Is Odell Beckham a top 10 wide receiver?
I would say talent-wise, yes. I don't think the production has equated to that of late. And a lot of that, has to do with injuries and the system that he's in. I mean, is this the best system for Odell Beckham to be in? Probably not. I mean, they're really, to be honest, a run-first team, and they base everything off of that. So I still think he's a top 10 talent. I really do. I think the narrative that if he's not out there, it's easier on Baker Mayfield or their offense is better. I'm like, where's the logic there? I mean, do you think any defense is going up against the Browns saying, we hope Odell Beckham's in the game because that makes them a less potent offense? I mean, he's obviously a mismatch for a lot of defensive backs. He's obviously got the big playability and the ability to hurt you down the field. So no defense is going to walk into a game with Odell Beckham in and being like, oh, thank God he's on the field, right? We don't have to worry about that guy, right? I mean, he's clearly one of the more talented wide receivers. Just they have not been able to find that chemistry, and they have not been able to kind of get him rolling. Because I think he is one of those players where once you get him rolling, he becomes that unstoppable force, if you will.
I don't think he can catch with two hands. Like, it's crazy.
I don't know why. I swear to you, some of the best hands and the best guys I played with, they can always make the ridiculous catch or one-handed catch, but the drops are always the ones that are like the easiest ones.
Yeah.
And I just think they're so confident in their ability to make that catch that they start to take their eye off the ball. They start to move a little bit upfield. It's like as a quarterback, sometimes the hardest ones to hit are the ones wide open. It's easier when you have a tight window because you understand exactly where you need to pinpoint that ball. When you got a guy who's running with 10 yards of separation, you just want to make sure you're not the guy missing that throw. You got to make sure you give it a little bit of a room for error.
USC Notre Dame this weekend. Your favorite USC Notre Dame memory is what?
Well, I don't have many. I mean, back then they were rolling. It's been 1,780 or 1,790 days now, I think, since USC beat Notre Dame. Notre Dame's won the last 3, or I think 6 of the last 8. And, so it's been a different deal. I mean, that's how rivalries are. A lot of times you get the ebbs and flows of rivalries between two teams, and that was USC's heyday. And then after Pete left, he obviously, I think the S in USC standing for sanctions at that point, and they haven't really been able to recover since. No, I mean, it was probably the 05 game. I mean, we called a play. It was a quarterback draw, and Charlie told me early in that week, he's like, I'm going to call this play, and you're going to run in for a touchdown, and we're going to win the game.
This is Charlie Weiss.
And Charlie Weiss, our head coach at the time. And, he was the green jerseys, everything building up to that game made it really special. Our pep rally, which traditionally was in the Joy Center back then, they held it in the stadium because there were so many people who were in town for it. I think we had 50,000 or something like that for a pep rally, I couldn't exist during the whole COVID deal, but it was, that play, I mean, reaching across the goal line, putting us, ahead at that moment. It was, just everything coming to fruition, but at the same time, looking at the scoreboard going, we left them too much time. That's honestly how I felt. My heart is knowing how good Matt and Reggie were in that entire offense. Like I knew we left too much time on the board.
And then when you realized that you had the Bush push, did you have a good angle when you were watching that?
Yeah, I saw it. I mean, I knew it was illegal, but what happens between the lines during the game, no one's going to come back and say they saw anything different. I mean, it's a legal play now. But back then it was illegal, and the officiating was honestly awful down the stretch. I mean, the spot for that play in particular was a terrible spot, but it is what it is. I would have hoped my running back would have done the same thing if it was me going in for a quarterback sneak. And that's what you do to try to win the game. I honestly blamed our PA speaker in the stadium because everyone rushed the field. And I'm thinking like, look, if the officials feel too much pressure, maybe they just call it. It's game over. And everyone runs off the field and everyone's still celebrating. But they made sure everyone cleared the field and they got the chance to kind of collect themselves and have that one final play. So it was an incredible atmosphere. It was obviously a pretty hard loss to take, but it was a very fun journey. That entire week was very memorable.
Okay, but you're going to see Leinart and Reggie Bush on Saturday. How long does it take for that conversation to come up?
Well, here's what you have to understand at Fox. There's a lot of USC alum who then transition over to work for Fox. So I'm constantly reminded of it. It's not like we've got a bunch of Notre Dame alums who are like trying to figure out a way of not putting it in there. Like they actually referenced it last week. I mean, we weren't even playing last week. Both teams were on byes, but they've still referenced it. So I can't get away from it. I just keep trying to remind them, like, again, you guys put Aunt Becky in a jail cell or whatever with some of the stuff going on with USC. I keep reminding you of all the dirt that's going on right now. I was like, maybe Southern Cal should focus on that and not so much replaying a highlight from 15 years ago.
You did a Full House reference for these guys?
I love Aunt Becky. I'm just saying. I mean, it seems like they got a lot of people paying to find their way in there.
My son and one of my daughters went to USC. And how they went there, I have no idea. On their own merits, by the way.
You got something to tell me?
No,
you got something to tell me,
no.
Dan?
But the funny thing is my daughter called me when this whole thing broke, and she said, "Dad, swear to me that you did not pay for me to get in USC." And I go, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I'm paying tuition." She goes, "But you didn't bribe anybody, did you, Dad?" I go, "No." And then I say to my son, I said, "I didn't hear from you." He goes, "No. I knew you didn't have to bribe for me to get into USC."
Well, that's weird because I've been on their campus. I remember seeing this Patrick building.
Yeah.
I was wondering, I wonder who donated that out here. It's a beautiful building, by the way. If that is you, Dan.
Yes, it is.
Kudos to you.
Yeah.
Kudos to you.
Yeah. It was just a donation. It was a gift,
right.
Brady.
Right.
Yeah, just a gift. Good luck this weekend. Fight the good fight. Okay.
I will.
Yeah.
I will.
Not fight on.
Watch,
Don't fight on.
Right.
Fight the good fight.
We're going to watch the game again, and then for some reason, people seem to think like it's going to end differently. I'm like, no, it ends. It ends the same way every time. Yep.
Thank you, Brady.
Thank you.
That's Brady Quinn at Fox Sports, and the co-host, Two Pros and a Cup of Joe. That's the show that precedes ours on Fox Sports Radio.